Hello and welcome to an episode of the Manufacturing Leads podcast with me, Mark Bracknell, Managing Director of Theo James Recruitment. Today, we welcome on Peter Cottle, the Head of Supply Chain at Walker Filtration. What an episode this was. Honestly, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I've learned so much from Peter. It was a fascinating conversation, not only on leadership, and we discussed the art of accountability or the need for accountability, along with building friendships and emotional intelligence, but also specifically supply chain and how crucial supply chain is within the manufacturing industry. We talked about building resilient supply chains. Peter went into detail about how exactly you do that, what data you need to be analyzing. We talked about that ever-changing AI and automation piece and how that will change the face of supply chain and manufacturing forever. Before, we talked about crucial elements like sustainability and ESG and how companies should be harnessing sustainability to really build a long-term future and also relationships with their supply chain, along with loads of other stuff. It's one of those episodes where you're going to enjoy, it's going to get you thinking, but you're also going to come away with some real tangible tips and advice within leadership, but also specifically supply chain and operations. So thank you so much, Peter. Really enjoy this. Please just click that like and subscribe button. Really appreciate it. It helps grow the show. But please sit back, enjoy. Thank you very much. Excellent. A massive warm welcome today to Peter Cottle, the Head of Supply Chain at Walker Filtration. How are we doing, Peter?
I'm great, Mark. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. Very good. And really looking forward to this. And I can't wait to go through your journey and all things supply chain. Before we do that, it's the first question. It's a question I ask everyone that comes on. What does it mean to you, Peter, to be a leader?
So I was thinking about this because obviously I've seen your podcasts and I don't really want to go down the typical route of looking at sort of strategy. So I've got a couple of points really I think is important from a leader perspective. And I think the first one really is around accountability. I think it's so important from a leader perspective that when you say you're going to do something or you hit a time scale, that's really important to commit yourself to that time scale. I think accountability always comes across as quite like a negative aspect, and I sort of look at it from a positive perspective, because if you build in that sort of accountability, you also build better relationships, you build up trust and credibility. So I think it's really important from an accountability perspective. Leaders should embrace that and commit to what you're doing. The second one really is emotional intelligence. I think it's really important to have that sort of empathy towards not just your team, but obviously other people across the business. Again, I think you get a lot better reaction from people and buy-in, and again, it just supports you as a leader going forward in those challenging times if you understand your team, which then leads us quite nicely into sort of building strong relationships. I think personally, I've got a team that I really build up friendships. I've been at Walker Filtration for 6 years, and during that time, I've got a really good team, and I think we've become stronger because I have those sort of friendships built into that. I think a lot of people might then maybe disagree with that, because sometimes they might have that challenging aspect between, what happens if you then, have to do certain difficult conversations, and I think that's really then clear in terms of the boundaries of, what's friendship and then really what is, you're there to do a job, you're there to hit goals and objectives. So yeah, I think that's really important to build those sort of key relationships within that sort of leadership aspect. And then the other one for me is, and I think this probably comes up quite a lot, is obviously effective communication. And it's, to be honest, Mark, it's one that I really struggle with. Or not struggle with, it's a one where I think a lot of people struggle to get right. I'll give you an example. I do a quarterly review with the team, and we do sort of what's going well within the business. And I did a feedback session because initially I was wanting to do it every month. And across the whole team and supply chain, a lot of people want to do it monthly. Some people want to do it quarterly. Some people even said 6 months. And then even the content in that was all varied. So I think when we get into communication, it's really challenging to really get it right, because you're dealing with so many different aspects and different inputs from people. So I think that feedback loop is always important to re-engage. Are we doing it the right way? Is there anything that we're missing out in that sort of communication? And also the style of communication. You think a lot of people like that sort of stand-up presentation, but in fact, you've got one-to-ones, you've got email communication. So, it's really trying to fit what's best for the organization and you as a leader.
Excellent. Look, a superb answer. And thank you for obviously putting some real thought in that, Peter, as well, because it really resonated with me. And I like the fact that people will be driving in or walking or whatever, listening to this thinking and just thinking about their communication skills, about their relationships with their staff, about how accountable they are or they hold people to. And I was when I was listening to you, because I think actually they interlink really nicely for me, because I completely agree. I probably battled with that relationship piece in terms of that friendship piece with my employees, because naturally I'm someone who likes to get on with people.
Yeah, yeah,
And sometimes the advice is, as a manager, you're a manager and they're your staff, so you shouldn't get too close. And I probably battle with that a little bit. And you read books, don't you? You think, oh, I need to manage in this way and so forth. But I think ultimately you've got to do what you feel comfortable with, because that links in with the emotional intelligence piece.
yeah, yeah,
It took me a long time to realize that you've got to do what you're comfortable with. And if that for you is you get the best out of people from bringing them close and being close to them, that's the
Mhm.
best way to manage. But I agree with you. There has to be a boundary, and that boundary for me is that accountability piece,
Yeah, yeah,
because I still think people need that to be
yeah.
able to achieve. So I think they link really nicely.
Yeah, I think it's like sort of accountability then drives, if you're doing what you're saying you're going to do, it also drives that accountability down into, the wider business and especially the team, and if we've got a deadline, I expect the team to hit that deadline, and or an early communication, understand why that accountability is going to be missed.
Yeah, 100%. I think something I've struggled with until I changed the sort of way we do things is my own accountability. Because I think as a leader, and you don't have to own the business to not have accountability, sort of structurally. You can be someone very senior in the business, and the person above you just gives you that autonomy to be able
Yeah,
to work. And some people that works perfectly because they need that. Other people, and I'll add myself in that, need some accountability. So for me, that I had to put things in place. So I had targets, and it might be my staff and my leadership team holding my accountable. What are your thoughts on that? The accountability for leaders, would you say?
So, I think when we look at, let's say, when we go back to the strategy, the strategy is around looking at, where we go and, what's the vision and mission of the business. And I think, the accountability piece for me comes in to put the roadblock in place to get to where we need to be. And then that then hopefully gets supported by the wider business. So we all become accountable. So it's not just around, the leaders saying this is a direction we're going to go in. Yes, we need to communicate that direction, but then it's everyone's, let's say, responsibility, accountability to ensure we're on the right path. And we'll probably get onto this going forward. The dynamics of the global market then sometimes obviously can change those sort of strategies going forward.
Yeah, I agree. What do you think is the best way to become a better leader or learn to be leader? Because this isn't manufacturing in isolation. I think every sector falls on this, but people tend to just presume someone's good at a job, so they must be good as a leader. I fell into that trap, I would say, in terms of the early days of the business, just going, they must be good as a leader. And we didn't train them how to be a leader.
Yeah,
We just presumed. And I think in some instances, some people sank and some swam. And unfortunately, I think in some situations, there was then some fear behind those ones that did think that they ever could be a manager again, and that was a mistake I took, and we don't make that mistake again. But I still see a lot of companies fall into that trap. Or do you think actually in some situations it is better to just learn from mistakes and crack on? It splits people, this.
Yeah, I think there's a fine balance, Mark. I think, for me, I probably wasn't a natural leader. I think, I have learned a lot from mistakes, but I've also pushed myself, to do the necessary courses to get the awareness. The differentiation between what a manager and leader is really important. And I think that itself, a leader recognizing that where they've got areas of improvement themselves is also a good quality. It's that continuous sort of drive to improve yourself, but also others. I think if we look at leadership as a service, I feel like for me, there's a couple of aspects we can go down in terms of, yes, I'm here as a leader as a business within the business, but also, I'm here to serve the people around me. I really buy into the fact that I want my team and others around us to just be as, to reach their full potential. And as a leader, it's my job that I see is how do we get those people on those sort of right paths. So yeah, it's such a I think a leadership really there's so many different qualities around it, and and I think so many people have so many different viewpoints to it. It's really hard to really distinguish what is right.
Yeah, 100%. But I think that the beauty of it is it people will lead differently and manage differently because they've got different values and goals. And I think that in a senior management team, that's a positive. I think if everyone, if to some extent, if everyone did everything exactly the same, you have the same ideas, the same problems without solutions. So no, I think a mix is good. If you look at supply chain in particular, that supply chain is your passion. It's what you've always done. I still think, like any profession in engineering, there's probably a lack of awareness behind what that is to some extent for young people. Why did you? It's something you fell into. It's something you wanted to get into. What was your route into it?
Yeah, so probably the same as 99% of the people in supply chain profession, we fall into it. I think sort of, and again, that sort of grassroots learnings around what supply chain really is still, I think, missing. If we look at sort of schools, they look at business, but really do they look at the sort of functionality around the business areas. So yeah, I think a lot of the people just fall into supply chain. Myself, I left school 16. Academic wasn't my route initially. So the first job really I got was working for the Evening Chronicle in Newcastle, and really looking after their stores department. Having that responsibility to ensure you've got the right stocks around you for what if a machine goes down, a press, is really important. And that was really my sort of instigation into supply chain from that perspective. But I quickly realized there was so much more diversity in supply chain but I wasn't really getting exposure to. And then, the career then moves on from that into sort of different companies through material planning, strategic buying, commodity management. So again, I think it's really important that as a supply chain sort of professional, it's to get an overview of what really is supply chain. There's that misconceptions, supply chains maybe just logistics. And it's not really, I think it's end-to-end value chain, and there's so many different functions within that end-to-end, where you can either have an overall rounding or specialist in certain areas. So yeah, it's like everyone fell in.
Yeah, I find it fascinating because when we do inductions here, typically the awareness of manufacturing initially isn't great, and I quite like that because we can get to teach them, and then they can walk around factories and speak to people and start to learn over the years. But when you ask them, how do you think that was? Look at a laptop. How do you think that was made? They'll talk about the parts. They might talk about robots in a factory. But when you start to explain to them the design element of it, then the
Yeah,
the logistics or the supply chain, the buyer piece, the negotiating, all that. They start to be really interested because
yeah,
people don't see what the work that goes behind manufacturing
yeah.
anything, everything, do they?
Yeah, yeah. I think, people just think, yeah, sometimes have a magic wand and a product's made, and we probably will get onto sort of how we manage sort of resilience and, those complexities within supply chain, and that's not an easy task to do, and yeah, and I think um it would be really interesting, to really understand from, let's say, a pupil in school, what they really think of supply chain. Because I still don't think there's that an awareness that there is a full career, like, and, quite an attractive career, that is available for people. Young kids, I've got an apprentice, for example, in my team, and, um, you know, it's not really a natural career choice for people. And I think that's really sad to hear. But I think again, as we move forward, there's so much opportunity, and supply chain people are so valuable in my eyes, obviously from a bias perspective. They are so valuable to not just manufacturing, but across every organization.
100%. I think we need to start bringing awareness to how you reverse engineer what people think they want to become. And if that isn't a managing director, a director, an ops director,
Yeah,
you look at the career history. A lot of these people, they've come from supply chain because they
yeah,
understand the business, the strategy, and what it takes to be able to build like you say, a resilient supply chain, which the end to end product is a manufacturing part. So
yeah.
many have come from that route, haven't they?
Yeah, yeah. And I think you've hit a good point in terms of, you supply chain people, you know, they have to engage quite a lot with the external environment. And that just strengthens people's qualities from my perspective of, how to, manage different aspects within the business. So it also gives people the opportunity to, as you say, move into different functions from supply chain. The skills are quite transferable. So supply chain going into operations, or supply chain even going into sales, someone who's done, let's say, a negotiation course, if they go into that sales platform, they're in a much stronger position to then understand, because they've really already been in that situation already, of how to negotiate with a customer, and getting the best value from the business.
And if you look at AI and what will or what won't replace certain roles, etc., it will not take away the emotional intelligence, relationship piece, the negotiating. It will change the face of everything. But ultimately, those skills will always be there, and they'll be more important because
Yeah.
certain roles will be. I mean, how do you see, AI and data? How do you see it changing supply chain from where we are today?
So AI, I think there's so many things going on. I think there's an important piece here to really start off with for me is, there's a massive gap in sort of industries. Again, I went to the Richmond Supply Chain Conference last week. I've been fortunate to go to other conferences, and there's a clear disparity between SMEs and sort of big organizations. Sometimes, when I go along to these events, even Walker Filtration being quite a large organization, we're still massively behind in terms of that digitalization. And it's quite daunting because sometimes it's really unclear how to start. There's so many different um, technologies, or AI, machine learning, digital twins. It's such a massive buzzword at the minute, that it's hard to really understand where to start. Um, and also that investment piece. I'll give you an example. Last year I was working with a company called Value Chain, which was looking at a collaboration platform for really like an end-to-end visibility. Um, and they're doing some fantastic work, but then all of a sudden it's like, okay, is it still right for water filtration? Are we getting the sort of return on investment? Um, you know, what skills do we need to manage the sort of technology as well. But I think people, have to embrace technology. It's changing. And we get into sort of what does that look like? Which areas do we focus on? You've got machine learning that does predictive analysis on inventory. You've got what I've just mentioned around collaboration spaces, visibility and transportation. And all this comes at a cost to the organization. And I think this is where it becomes really challenging to really engage with that sort of technology. But for me, I'm a digital person. I love data. I feel it brings a lot of value, streamlines operations, it builds in efficiencies. So, and it's here to stay. So I think at some point we've got to embrace it, and businesses, not just like Walker Filtration, but other SMEs have really got to focus time and effort on what is right for their business for that sort of digital roadmap.
Yeah.
Because it's here to stay.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think what I like, just to pinpoint what you said there about it's right for your business. Do you know what I mean? Because it isn't a one size fits all. And actually, to some extent, the argument could be that big corporate businesses have got the cash to invest it, but actually, they've also got to roll it out to a huge organization, multi-site, change the culture. Where actually an SME is probably at an advantage. They can make those small tweaks and they can understand quite quickly if it's right for their business or not, because some of these things are so small but can make a huge difference to the business, can't they?
Yeah, definitely. And I think maybe the roles of supply chain are also changing within that digital landscape. If we think, we start hearing different sort of job titles through, supply chain transformation, and that is gearing, businesses up for integrating and implementing digitalization. But it extends outside of just sort of, the sort of digital space, but around sort of automation in general. If I look at some of the work we're looking in from a warehouse perspective, you've got fully automated warehouses, that do pick and places, whether it's using, different scanning technologies. There's just so much to go at. And, I think it's really, really sort of interesting in terms of how that landscape's going to change over time. But technology also changes at a rapid rate. We were looking at something called demand-driven MRP, which is, again, a tool that looks at sort of predicting inventory. But again, that's quite quickly potentially becoming obsolete by other digital means, So you may have then spent time and effort in that sort of area to develop, which is now then getting, replaced by, again, more sophisticated streamlining ways.
Yeah, 100%. Because ultimately, because there are, like you said, there are so many tools now, and I'm I'm a little bit like a magpie in the sense that this looks great. Let's get this in. I've just before this, we're changing. I've just sat on a demo there because we're changing our phone system so a complete AI, so they listen to our calls and create notes and all this great stuff.
Brilliant.
But I still come back to every time. It's got to mean we make more profit, because like anything,
Yeah.
it can look great and it can make people's life easier. But
Yeah.
as a business, if it doesn't make more money for the business, then it's not a good investment.
No. But I think sometimes it's like, okay, do we look at profitability or do we look at value? You know
Hmm.
what I mean? So again, when you bring in certain digitalization, that might then free up resources that really needs to focus on different areas, sort of like sustainability, risk management opportunities, building a more resilient supply chain, where at the minutes, I think a lot of businesses may struggle with balancing all the challenges that we see in supply chain. So the digitalization aspect for me is an enabler to allow us to really protect the business going forward. Um, yeah, it's a means to an end, I think, but also it's never ending. if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. 100%. It's fascinating, scary, exciting, all those things, isn't it? Apologies for interrupting this episode with a very quick announcement about my business. Theo James are a specialist talent provider specifically to the manufacturing and engineering sector. I'm incredibly proud of what we've achieved since our inception in 2015. We specialize in roles from semi-skilled trades right the way up to our TJ exec search arm of the business, both from the contract and permanent side. We offer both bespoke one-off campaigns for hard-to-fill roles or a full partnership service where we become an extension of your business. For any information, please get in touch with me or the team. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. Thank you. You mentioned data, and I think data is different, links in with AI and automation, but it is still it's different. What would you say is the most important data that you're looking at, or companies should be looking at within supply chain to drive those efficiencies now? What do you say?
So I think when we look at so I'm going to flip into more of the operations here in terms of, I think when we look at automation and operations, it can quickly tell you certain aspects around, a certain situation that might be happening on the shop floor, for example. So it's a quick red flag in terms of, we're not hitting the daily performance, so it flags things up to say, listen, we've got a concern here. I think also, data, looking at from a supply chain perspective, that heat map of sort of risks that you can see coming through. And we don't have this at Walker Filtration, but again, in terms of the vision, I can see, how much it can benefit businesses in terms of, getting that early warning systems in the supply chain. If something happens in the Far East, what does that actually mean? And the way I visualize it is, we've done a lot of work over the years in sort of understanding country of origin of products. So, for example, as soon as we see an issue in, let's say, China in the Red Sea, for example, we can quickly establish not just the direct materials that we buy through China, but the indirect materials that's within the pipeline, and really create a source of information that we can act upon quite quickly. Now, again, we get into then, global sourcing, dual sourcing. Have we got the tools and sort of ability to move product around? But the data allows us to really have that sort of access and visualization to make sort of the decision making much quicker.
Yeah, exactly that. You've got to be able to make decisions. You need facts and you need the data, so it arms you with the relevant data to do so. That's fascinating, actually, because I imagine, like you say, there will be, probably is already there, bots that they can build in supply chain. Like you say, to whether you're trawling news articles, the trawling stocks and shares, whatever it is, those early indicators of an issue, which I guess is well timed with all the stuff that's gone on over the last sort of couple of months with the US and China and the trade war. Do you think if companies were armed with that, they could have made decisions quicker potentially? Is that coming?
Yeah, so I think if we look at sort of the challenges that all supply chain, all business has gone through really over the last, not just 18 months, but the last couple of years, and if we look at Brexit, COVID, Ukraine war, these all throw up challenges around continuity, and I think that challenge has made every business, and especially from a supply chain professional, more resilient. We've got to think outside the box, and I think again, you can never predict, Mark. Honestly, if someone was to say to me, how do you predict sustainability or stability, sorry, in your supply chain for the next 12 months? The honest answer is, it's very difficult to say that I could guarantee that. And I think it's also very difficult to ensure that you've got all the right what if scenarios covered, because you just don't know what's around the corner. And to maybe answer your question, I think these geopolitical situations has really enforced businesses to have at least some plans in place. whether we look at sort of, our global sourcing strategies, does that change to sort of nearshoring now instead of the global sourcing? We look at what Walker's doing in terms of our Atlas Copco, looking at sort of local for local manufacturing. So again, that sort of brings you much more closer to your geographical market. So I think what it allows us to do is to create the right strategy, to put the right sort of roadblocks in place to become more resilient as a business. Supply chains are getting longer, customers wanting products a lot smaller. There's so much complexity to manage. And again, I think digitalization and sort of risk management really come together to build that sort of overall resilience within businesses.
Yeah, what I really like about that answer is everyone can take something from it, because you're absolutely right, and that's it's not just that's not manufacturing or supply chain isolation. That's just, like you say, operationally good business model to have alternative plans to what's happening right now. And I think that was probably the lesson I learned in COVID. I would never have thought for 1 second how the business would change overnight and change week to week to some extent. And suddenly, a business which might need 3 to 4 months cash in a bank probably came out of COVID and thought, right, we need 6 to 7, because you just never know when suddenly half your revenue streams completely cut off there. It changes.
Yeah. But I think the other thing that's really important as well is like the digital landscape as well also creates other risks. We see that now. The biggest risk now to business is cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So again, you've got to put all that sort of investment, and risk prevention measures in place. So it's just another way of now protecting your business digitally. So yeah, it's just swinging the pendulum, isn't it, in terms of or balancing that in terms of the sort of product flow and the information flow, to maximize your continuity as a business.
I completely agree. Fully enough, I had Kelly Madison on the podcast last week. It's about to go out. Who's the membership director, Make UK Defence. And the reason I got her on is because a lot of companies are trying to get into that space, and there's probably lack of awareness of, we debunked some myths, and she gave some really good detail in terms of how people get started. And she said, step one is an ISO, certain ISO standards you need to be able to get in the room. The second one is cybersecurity, which people neglect, but actually it is as important, if not more important than anything. Particularly in defence, which obviously is the compliance is so high for obvious reasons. But that's another challenge that companies need to tackle. But it is so crucial, isn't it? That box is more than ticked. It's concentrated on.
And I think if we just look at compliance in general, Mark, on us, it's really difficult, and a lot of it, falls on to certain supply chain professionals to maintain alongside all the other value that they create to the business. So if I look at compliance in general, we have the requirements which I think most organizations are now used to, which is your ISO standards, 9001, 14001, 45001. So when we look at that sort of triple badge, there's now an expectation from customers that business have all these compliance measures in place, and again that cascades down to a lot of work that we have to do within the supply base to ensure that we've got the right sort of due diligence measures in place, and it continues to evolve. Outside of that, you then got obviously the product compliance. So we talk about reach, wash, conflict minerals, PFAS. The list is literally never ending. And again, the supply chain teams now, and this is where, again, if we look at the sort of value creation of supply chain, they have to balance, the the expectations around, maximizing profitability, demonstrating value for money, but also on that I would call the compliance side to ensure that you've got all your right due diligence in places. You really understand the products that you're buying. You have strategies around, if you have any sort of items in the products that have, let's say, classed as high risk. You've got measures in place to work with suppliers and engineering teams to then de-risk it.
Yeah.
And then so again, it's that balancing act to ensure that the teams are providing the necessary value to the business. And I think that's where sometimes a lot of people don't see that value that we do create. Um, and yeah, it's just an area I think that is it doesn't really get sort of the acknowledgement it deserves within the supply chain forum.
Yeah, completely agree. I facilitated a supply chain roundtable during university the other week, and quite a few points on the agenda. But one of those which links into what you're saying there was that sustainability and ESG piece. And actually, well, it's a bit concerning to some extent because on one side, people were saying that when they're now tendering for work, let's say that their sustainability, they're asking for more now, much more on that sustainability
Yeah,
piece.
yeah,
It's not, it doesn't
yeah.
feel like just a tick box exercise. On the flip side to that, companies were saying it's become very challenging now to balance it out because of the cost problem they have as a business because it's all about balance. What are your thoughts on where we're at now as a market within that sustainability piece, and is that something that you're been asking for or been asked more for on that supply chain piece?
Yeah. So, I mean, to be honest, Mark, we could have a whole session on sustainability. I think that is in itself as a topic. I think when we look at the requirements coming back from customers, but not just customers, our business, we've all got our scope 3 targets around, CO2 reduction. Um, you know, Supply chain is probably for me, at the forefront of that change management in terms of waste reduction and looking at different technologies, different greener materials. So circular economy. It's not just about returnable packaging. It's the life management of a product. And how do we look at it from a concept and an engineering perspective to really how we dispose of it at the end of its life. And that's really challenging because sometimes it's not as easy with some of the materials that people are dealing with. ESG, you mentioned before, it's such a massive requirement now, even just from Walker Filtration perspective. We are working towards EcoVadis because we ask all our suppliers to just try and look at EcoVadis, which is a ESG platform. And so we want to do that ourselves to say, listen, we don't just expect you guys as our supply chain to do it. We're going to do it ourselves. Myself and my team are working at the start of looking at ISO 2400, which is sustainable procurement. Because again, sustainability is not going to go away. And I think business can look at this from a competitive advantage. I was on a fantastic course last year, and it looked at sustainability on more of a selling perspective. I went on this course around looking at, I'm an eco warrior. I want to try and not sell. I want to try and do my bit for the environment, and it quite quickly came around that sustainability has got to be a add-on to how you sell your product. You can't expect customers to want to buy a product because it's better for the environment. It's still got to come back and make a profitable return on their business. So it becomes a requirement, and I think we look at what people are doing around that is looking at X as a service or anything as a service. So people are really are partnership with customers to onboard their sort of sustainability initiatives, that then obviously becomes a revenue generator. So yeah, there's so much to go out with sustainability, and I think supply chain is really at the forefront, yeah, of making those changes happen.
Yeah, that is great advice, that, because it links in with everything you're saying there, right from the start about that relationship building, isn't it? If you can work with your supply chain and there's that continuity and consistency between you,
Yeah.
it just creates long lasting relationships, doesn't it, essentially?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, and I think you know, we all have these sort of goals and objectives within every business. And I think you mentioned it before, it shouldn't be a tick box exercise. Yes, you can then say you have certain compliance, but really I think the true drive is okay. And if you've identified something that is of a concern, or you've identified improvements, it's really acting on those to drive the success of sustainability. Um, so yeah, it's another one like digitalization. There's so many arms and legs to it that um, it could be that, and most businesses do have this. It's a function in its own right. But again, a lot of businesses don't really have that luxury of having that sort of dedicated resource. But it's still the right thing to do in my eyes. It's yeah, it's protecting the planet going forward.
Yeah, 100%. And like you say, it is a balance to have that dedicated resource. But I would argue that businesses who are prioritizing it, or businesses that aren't prioritizing it, are missing a trick and leaving so much on the table. Because what I've seen, companies that have really sort of ran with it, they've created a culture, an internal culture in the business, and they change people's habits in and out of work. And people are proud to work there. People are proud to work for a business which doesn't just tick a box and doesn't do something for because they'll get more work out of it. They do it because they care. And the new generation, which is great, they really, really care about the planet and they care
Yeah,
what people are doing in the business, and they don't want to work for an unsustainable business which just doesn't care about it. It's as simple as that.
yeah, totally agree. And that, and I think we see that you know the younger generation coming through, they've got an expectation. And if you want to become an employer of choice, you've got to demonstrate that you are not just ticking boxes. Um, you know, and that's not just around sustainability as well. It's around the work-life balance. It's around how the newer generation see their working ethic to businesses. 9 to 5 isn't what people want to do anymore. So it's um, and when we talk about supply chain early in the podcast about being a career choice, we've really got to engage with these newer generations, because you know do they even want to work in a manufacturing facility at all? And that's where we've got to really tap into the potential opportunities and making a supply chain a career of choice. Because it is such a good career to have.
Completely agree. Which you segued me nicely into that final question. But what advice would you give, to a young professional starting out or considering starting out in a supply chain logistics world? What advice would you give them, knowing all the years of experience now here?
So I think one of the things I really missed out in, and I'm reflecting here in terms of my process through my career, is um, get a mentor. Seriously, I think it's an underrated process. A mentor can really steer someone's career, but also fast track it. To have someone to sort of bounce ideas off and really sort of um, guide that sort of young person coming into the career is profound for me. Um, the other thing for me is, supply chain so vast, is, um, take the opportunity to really get an awareness of the different aspects of supply chain. I think a lot of times people get into one role and they stay in that one role, and then they find it then difficult to branch out. And again, sort of branching out just brings you or enables you to have a much more better understanding of how businesses work. I think, really take learning as not just a one-stop opportunity. I've got this mindset of learning for life. I find it really interesting when you pick something up and you're going, oh my God, that is so interesting. I'm going to learn it myself. Because you've been in career for 30 years, it doesn't mean to say you know everything. So again, there's a lot of things I think in terms of continue to do CPD, keep abreast of what's going on sort of globally, but also within your technical expertise. And it just always keeps you at the forefront of the skill set needed to do a good job.
Excellent. Fantastic answer. And just finally, Peter, what's happening next sort of 18 months, 2 years for Walker at the Scopco? What's on the agenda?
So again, we've got like always, we've got quite an aggressive growth strategy. So it's again, how do we maximize those opportunities? And that's whether looking at sort of acquisitions, but also geographical expansions. But you never know what's on the corner. So again, it's really just keeping abreast of what's going on geopolitically. What impacts can have. Or what those sort of things can have an impact to your organization. Talent, how do we really get talent into the business, and the future of management. We drive that through different, let's say, coaching or training courses within the teams. So succession planning really is quite key for us as well. So yeah, there's a lot going on. It's always interesting. There's never a dull moment.
Well, look, Peter, thank you so much for this, because look, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. It's been I've learned loads. It's just sometimes I listen. Sometimes obviously I'm on it, but I'm listening and I'll pick out maybe one sort of two. But there's so much from this show here, because I love the fact that we've talked about that leadership piece and people were listening, thinking, right, okay, I can. There's tips that will get. It got me thinking, it will get them thinking. And I really love how specific you've got into supply chain and the resilience piece and the data piece and AI piece, because there's so much. And I think what I love about it is it just shows how exciting this space is. And it just shows how ever-changing it will be and how it will look completely different in 5 to 10 years' time. And I do think we've got some work to do to create some awareness behind supply chain as a profession. And I think this will go a long way to start doing that. And hopefully people listening who are perhaps supply chain managers and perhaps want to give some awareness to their kids or whatever, can get them to listen to it, because it's so important. It's such an integral part of a manufacturing business and strategy. So thank you so much, Peter. It's been great. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
It's been a pleasure to be involved, Mark. It's a grown podcast. So I feel privileged to be invited on to discuss supply chain.
Thank you, mate. Thank you so much for listening or watching this episode of the Manufacturing Leaders Podcast. Please just like or subscribe. It really helps grow the show and obviously improve the industry. If you want any more information about Theo James, as I mentioned midway through the episode, please get in touch with me or the team. I would love to talk about how we can help you directly or your business. We are more than just a recruiter, and I know people say that, but it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. We are in business for much more than just a bums on seats approach. We want to help people grow. We want to help improve their lives. And ultimately, I want to work with businesses and people who share the same values as we do. And that's something I'm incredibly passionate about. So please, if that is you and you are passionate about that dream role or passionate about your people, please get in touch with me or the team. I would absolutely love to talk a bit more detail. Thank you very much. Speak soon.